been in many, heard the whole thing. So today we're going to be hearing about glyphosate and human health with Ed Stockman. And we always just take a minute at the start of our workshops to thank our sponsors. This is a really important part of our conference that makes all of this possible. So we have our gold sponsors here and our silver sponsors, and we ask that you support their businesses and let them know how much you appreciate their support of them. It means a lot to us. So we are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. We're all in various parts of the Northeast or maybe beyond. We had somebody from Wisconsin in one of my workshops. So if you'd like to take a moment to find your location on this map to honor the Indigenous people whose land you now occupy, I will drop this website into the chat in just a minute. And you can all, you can all find your local area through that website. That's our ending slide. So I'm gonna turn things over in just a minute to Ed Stockman. Ed has followed for a very long time. Ed is an agrobiologist, a fourth-generation farmer, and a co-founder and education director of Regeneration Massachusetts. He is a former retired NOFA Mass organic extension educator and has served in the Peace Corps Alternative Agriculture Program as a volunteer and trainer in Ecuador. Ed is a GMO educator and has given talks throughout New England. I think Ed said that he's been involved with NOFA for something like 30 years. So thank you for being here and sticking with us. So yeah, I'll turn things over to Ed. I'll stop screen sharing. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and then we'll have time at the end for questions, and just chat a message to me at any point if you'd like. Thank you very much. We'll give Ed a minute to start screen sharing.
Okay, welcome everybody. I was thinking 24 hours ago, I was huddled in the basement hoping that those tornado warnings that we were getting up here in Plainfield in the hills, my farm is at 1,800 feet in elevation, and we got hellacious winds, high elevation type winds that were up here, and you would not want to see my corn patch today. It's laying flat. So I appreciate you being here after the storm we had, and I hope everybody's safe and doing well. From not only, excuse me?
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second here. Okay. I forgot to ask you whether your slides would be available afterward, and people like to know that. Somebody just put that in the chat because people want to know whether they should take notes or whether they have access to these slides.
Well, they won't have access to my slides, but they're going to have access to my research.
Okay.
I have a 5-page research list of research documents and studies that I'm going to make available to all the participants.
Great, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So my name is Ed Stockman, Summit Farm, Plainfield. That's my email address. I'll give you another one. Hopefully you have a pencil available because I want you to be able to contact me so I can send you information. It's difficult for me to send my PowerPoints. So if there's anything on these PowerPoints, you might want to take notes. So I am a co-founder of Regeneration Massachusetts, and we are a statewide organization, an educational organization, and we're focusing on consumers and to talk about healthy soils and the role that those soils play in nutrition. It's amazing how many people don't know that, and that the role that healthy soils play in mitigating climate change. So hopefully you'll take a look at our Facebook page. all you have to really do is Google Regeneration Mass. We don't have a website. We just have a Facebook page. We find that's a better educational tool. So I want to just go through some of the basics. I know some of you really know this, but I'm going to just breeze through the basics here on glyphosate before we get into some of the disease factors associated with it. But it's the active ingredient in Roundup, rodeo, and a lot of other glyphosate-based herbicides. So it's not just Roundup. There's a lot of other not as famous brands as Roundup out there. And it's not only an herbicide, but it's a crop desiccant as well. And we're going to talk about that. It's very tied to GMO crops. Matter of fact, those crops are dependent on glyphosate. 85% of the crops, GMO crops that are out there, are dependent on glyphosate. I originally started studying GMOs back in around 2000, and it's led to glyphosate, my interest in glyphosate. So it's a poison, it kills a wide variety of things. It's a systemic pesticide. And I've got what is a pesticide down here in my slide because people don't think that herbicides are pesticides. Weeds are pests. So herbicides, all of the herbicides are pesticides. It's not just insecticides or bacteriicides or rodenticides. It's all of the herbicides are classified as pesticides as well because weeds are a pest. So what are systemic pesticides? This is a category of pesticides that have come in since Rachel Carson wrote her book, Silent Spring, back in the 60s. These are much more insidious pesticides than she dealt with. Most of the ones that she dealt with, and I'm hoping that most of you have read that book, and if not, it's Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. And she dealt with mostly topical pesticides, insecticides, but now we have the systemic ones. So these get absorbed by the plant, and what happens is the GMO crops are genetically engineered to withstand the killing effects of the herbicide, and they survive the spraying of Roundup, but the weeds die. So these systemic pesticides, and we're talking about glyphosate now, that's our chosen systemic pesticide for this presentation, is really not only on the crop, but in the crop as well, in the plant tissue. So if you have a systemic pesticide and you spray a crop with it, the food that's made from that crop contains that pesticide. And you cannot wash it off, you can't peel it off, you can't destroy it with cooking. If you are eating foods that are sprayed with a systemic pesticide like glyphosate, you are also consuming that pesticide. It's amazing how many people don't know that. I'm sure all you guys do, but I want to review it anyway. So glyphosate is really excessively used in America. This is a graph that illustrates the adoption of glyphosate in American agriculture. This particular graph was actually formulated by the US Geological Survey. So it shows estimated pounds per year, and we're up to about 300 million pounds of glyphosate is applied onto American agricultural fields and around homes and other landscaping situations. In any one year, we're up to about 300 million pounds. You see the yellow on this, this bar graph is corn, green is soybeans. Those are the two big ones. And they receive a lot of glyphosate because both of those crops are genetically engineered. Cotton is another big one. That's in the red. We don't eat a lot of cotton, but we consume a lot of cottonseed oil, cotton oil. So we really consume it in an oil form. So here's the reasons for the excessive use of glyphosate. We have more and more GMO crops being grown in this country. And if you have a lot of GMO crops, a lot of acreage of it, you're going to apply a lot of glyphosate. And the more glyphosate you apply, the more glyphosate residues are in our food and water. So just the amount of GMO crops that are being grown in this country. We grow more GMO crops than any country on the planet. Superweed development is another reason for the excessive use of glyphosate. Superweeds are weeds that have now become resistant to the killing effects of glyphosate. So the more superweeds you have, the more glyphosate needs to be applied to kill them. So what happens is the normal dosage or application rate of glyphosate on a field may not kill all of these superweeds. And what they do, what farmers do is just add more to that particular application. And of course, homeowners and landscapers, golf courses, highway departments, they all use glyphosate to control vegetation in various ways. Also, and this is a well-kept secret with many people. Now, if you know these well-kept secrets, that's okay. Your job now is to go out and spread the word and let your friends and neighbors and relatives and anybody you care about or love know about these kinds of glyphosate in our food. But glyphosate is used as a pre-harvest desiccant. So it is sprayed on non-GMO crops. It's sprayed on GMO crops, but it's also sprayed on non-GMO crops like wheat, oats, beans, and sunflowers. Those crops are non-GMO. And what happens is the glyphosate actually kills the non-GMO crop and prepares it for harvest. So if you, excuse me, so if you're a farmer and you plant 1,000 acres of oats, for instance, oats are non-GMO, and you want all of those oats to be prepared for harvest all at the same time, they probably weren't planted at the same time with 1,000 acres. So you want them to all be ready to be harvested and put the big combines in there to harvest them. What you'll do is you'll go through that field and spray that entire 1,000 acres with Roundup. And what happens is the Roundup now is taken up by the plant, the oat plant, just like any plant, and it kills the oat plant, and then it dries the oat plant and prepares it for harvest. So non-GMO wheat, oats, beans, sunflowers, and there's more than that. Please look this up on the computer. There's lists on the computer of crops that get pre-harvest dried with Roundup. What happens is they dry this, and then that glyphosate is taken up and becomes part of the seeds that we eat. All of that wheat, oats, beans, and sunflower are all the seeds of that crop. And what happens is the glyphosate accumulates in those seeds. So we'll talk a little more about this later on. So glyphosate is much more than just an herbicide. In 1964, it was patented as a metal chelator. A chelator is a chemical that actually bonds to other chemicals, and it chemically bonds and holds those other chemicals pretty tightly. So when it was first discovered, it was used for cleaning and descaling pipes in a factory, let's say. And scale is the chemical residues, the mineral residues that form on the inside of a pipe and close a pipe up, the actual lumen, the opening of a pipe. So they used to put glyphosate through these pipes to bind the calcium, manganese, magnesium, and iron, and actually clean out the pipes. Now, when you spray this on a field or take this into your bodies, it also has the ability to bind calcium, manganese, magnesium, and iron in your body or in the soils. And if it binds it in the soil, that means it's no longer available to the crop plant. If it binds it in your body, I have no idea what will happen there. Let me say one thing. I am an agrobiologist. I'm interested in glyphosate from an agricultural perspective, but I also got interested in it from a human health perspective. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a researcher, medical researcher. All I'm telling you today is about the research that I've found on glyphosate and how it impacts humans as far as cancer and other diseases. So at the end of this, don't ask me too many medical questions because I'm not going to answer them. I am not qualified to answer them. But I do know I do know what's going on about this topic from the research that I've actually found. So in '74, Monsanto patented it as an herbicide. So since 1974, it's been used as an herbicide, not with GMO crops, because GMO crops didn't come in until the mid-90s, 1990s. So it was used for more than 20 years as just an herbicide for various crops, but not in conjunction, not associated with GMO crops. In 2003, Monsanto patented this as an antimicrobial substance, an antibiotic. And we're going to talk about the implications of that patent and the fact that it's an antimicrobial substance. And then in 2010, they took a little broader view of glyphosate, and they patented it as a biocide. And what that really does is they patent it so it can kill a lot more things than just bacteria. For instance, different plants and animals and microorganisms. So how does glyphosate enter the body? Primarily through our food. And if you've been following this topic at all, you know that our food is riddled with glyphosate. Now, us being organic minded people, we try to eat organically as much as possible. We eat organic in this house, but drinking water can have it as well as the air. Most GMO foods or foods that have GMO ingredients will have glyphosate residues in that food. And there's been very little testing associated with this on the government level. And the fourth point down here says both the USDA and the FDA, they test for hundreds of different foods for hundreds of different chemicals every year and put out reports. And guess which one they don't test for at all? The most widely used herbicide, glyphosate. So it's this don't ask, don't tell business. I don't want you to leave this presentation today thinking that the USDA and the FDA are agencies that are looking out for ordinary citizens. They're not. Maybe when they started. I know my parents were very happy when the EPA started and all, but none of those federal agencies today are really look out for the ordinary person. They're much more interested in corporate considerations. So drinking water, food, drinking water, and air in areas where we have large conventional farms. We don't have large conventional farms in Massachusetts, but New York State does, and Vermont and Maine, and there's not too many in New Hampshire, but maybe there is. So, and Rhode Island and Connecticut. New Jersey used to be the Garden State, but it doesn't have, it's got the first most densely populated population in the country. It's a very dense state now, and they don't have the farms that they used to have at one time. So here's a graph, a bar graph that the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, put out they were doing a lot of good work on glyphosate and GMOs. And then all of a sudden, when in 2016, when Trump was elected, all that went away. And I haven't seen any good research from them since those days. He promised to do away with a lot of these agencies. He wasn't able to do that, but he certainly was able to make them ineffective and pretty corrupt in many respects. So this is a graph that shows you glyphosate and AMPA. The blue is glyphosate, the kind of greenish color is AMPA. AMPA stands for amino-methylphosphonic acid, which is the primary metabolite of glyphosate. In other words, it's what glyphosate breaks down to in the soil, and it's highly toxic as well as glyphosate. So it's one of the reasons that the USGS have put these together is because AMPA is toxic as well. I don't know how well you can read the bottom section of this graph, but starting on the left, we're talking about groundwater, wastewater treatment plants, lakes, ponds, and wetlands, soil and water, streams, large rivers, precipitation, ditches and drains, and soil and sediment. So this is a detection frequency. In other words, like wastewater treatment plants, for instance, the outfall of it, where it dumps into usually rivers or the ocean, where it's treated and then released into the environment. They find high levels of AMPA in there because it's been treated and the glyphosate is broken down. And granted, it's broken down, but it's broken down into a highly toxic substance anyway. So that's what gets released into the environment. And you see that a little more than 80% of the time, they found AMPA in the wastewater that's released from wastewater treatment plants. So it's being released into the environment. Glyphosate and AMPA is ubiquitous in the environment. I really got interested in this when I took a look at glyphosate in the environment, and then from there I got interested in human health. But a study in 2017 found that Americans now are exposed by an increase of 500% since Roundup Ready crops have been introduced. In other words, before Roundup Ready crops were introduced, crops that needed to have Roundup to grow well and to control weeds, the exposure was much less. And we talked about that earlier, that the more GMO crops you have, the more exposure we're going to have as citizens, as consumers, as eaters to glyphosate. Approximately 90% of the corn grown in this country and 94% of the soybeans are treated with glyphosate. Tremendous acreage. Not only does American food system grow a lot of food, they also, our agriculture in this country is the largest polluter in this country. And people don't realize that, but it's all of these agrochemicals, these toxic agrochemicals that are put on our agricultural land. And it might only be a quart per acre, but there's millions of acres, leading to millions of quarts of glyphosate that's being added. So there's a lot of pollution associated with this. At the end of the Mississippi watershed, we have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico the size of New Jersey. So it's a tremendous problem that we have going on in this country. So since 1974, when Monsanto patented glyphosate as a herbicide, there's been, and this is an estimate, because there's no real good numbers on this. All right, nobody's keeping really good track of this, especially the USDA or the FDA or the EPA. But since 1974, there's been 1.8 million tons of glyphosate applied to American agricultural lands. You know, we were blessed with the best soils on the planet. It's one of the reasons we're a great country. People who aren't into agriculture don't realize that. There's hardly anybody in New York City that has to worry about where their food is coming from. They don't have to go out and plant and maintain and harvest and store food. It's all taken care of for them. All right, so that's like 8 or 10 million people that don't have to think about agriculture and really know very little about it. Even my friends that live in Manhattan Island really know very little about it. So we were blessed with the best soils on this planet, and what we're doing with them is poisoning those soils. We're degrading those soils constantly, and one of the things we degrade it with, and there's plenty of others, is glyphosate. So it's really a big problem. Let's talk about another big problem, cancer. Cancer is epidemic in this country, but we're going to talk about cancers that are associated with glyphosate. I want to show you a video now. It's about a 1-minute video, and you're going to have to be patient with me on this. My PowerPoint program won't let me embed videos anymore because it's too old and it doesn't support it. But this is the way I found that I can still show groups of videos. So hang on, everybody. I might show it more than once. It's a very short one.
Do not believe that glyphosate in Argentina is causing increases in cancer.
Oh boy.
So we're hearing your sound, but we're not seeing your video.
Right, it's not up right now. Is the video sound still going?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna try it again.
Do not believe that glyphosate in Argentina is causing increases in cancer. You can drink a whole quart of it and it won't hurt you.
You want to drink some? We have some here.
I'd be happy to, actually, but not really, but
not really.
I know it wouldn't hurt me.
If you say so, I have some glyphosate.
No, I'm not stupid.
Okay, so you.
No, but I know
so it's dangerous. Right?
No, people try to commit suicide with it and fail fairly regularly.
Tell the truth.
It's not dangerous to humans. No, it's not.
So are you ready to drink one glass of glyphosate? No,
I'm not an idiot. Interview me about golden rice. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, then it's finished. Then the interview is finished.
That's a good way to solve things.
Yeah. You're a complete jerk. Do not believe that glyphosate in Argentina.
That was a lobbyist for Monsanto. Needless to say, he was fired after that interview. The interviewer called his bluff, and he didn't deal well with it at all. So lots of the scientific community, especially agrochemical community, say there's no worries, it's excreted. So you take it in and you excrete it out. So it's pretty widely distributed in the body, the bones and liver and kidney, and supposedly it's gone in 7 days. And when you excrete it from your urine and feces. And the Health Research Institute, that's on the bottom of this slide, they've been testing now for a couple of years, and their preliminary tests find that 86% of people who send in samples of their urine, they find levels, detectable levels of glyphosate in the urine. So it's in the food, it's in the water. If you live in a highly agricultural area, it's in the air, and it's in precipitation in those areas as well. So, it's as I say, it's ubiquitous. So people who eat non-organic oats, they have double the amount of glyphosate that people who don't. Well, why is that? The reason for that is because oats are non-GMO, and many of them are dried with glyphosate. They're desiccated with glyphosate. If you're growing oats in Canada, and a lot of oats are grown in Canada, and you have a cold, wet, cloudy fall, and those oats don't dry naturally, slowly, and you need to get that crop in, you're going to glyphosate them, dry them out, kill them, dry them out, and then harvest them. So people who eat non-organic oats can have high levels of glyphosate in whatever they're eating. The Health Research Institute laboratories, write that down if you're interested in having your urine tested. NOFA has a discount agreement with the Health Research Institute. You can see their website, I hope. It's kind of difficult to see that color, but you can see that. But all you have to do is really Google it. And NOFA has a discount agreement with them. So if you're going to have your urine tested, ask them about the discount at NOFA. Well, it's NOFA Mass, but I think other NOFAs have this discount as well. But NOFA Mass has a discount with this particular laboratory. The problem is it might be excreted in 7 days. My problem is what is it doing in there before it's excreted? And it's okay that it might get excreted in 7 days, but am I taking in any other glyphosate sources during those 7 days? And once again, what is it doing when it's in there? Is it impacting my body in any way? And slowly, it doesn't have to, kill me right away. If glyphosate killed people, small doses of it killed people, we wouldn't have glyphosate on the market. Most likely anyway. So here's some safety assessments. Monsanto says it's less toxic than table salt. Bayer now owns Monsanto. I assume everybody knows that. Bayer bought Monsanto, and they claim that glyphosate is totally safe and does not cause cancer. And then the EPA's recently made the statement that glyphosate poses no health risks, no risk to public health. But the World Health Organization has a group called the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC. And IARC has classified glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. And this team from the World Health Organization, and these are international scientists, very renowned scientists, they found an association between glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So what is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma? Well, it's a cancer that starts in the white blood cells. You have a variety of different white blood cells. We hear this term white blood cells, but really there's like 5 or 6 different white blood cells. And the one that that glyphosate impacts are the lymphocytes. And these lymphocytes are part of our immune system. So if it impacts those particular cells, it's going to also impact our immune system and our ability to withstand different diseases. So what you do is you get abnormal lymphocytes, abnormal numbers of lymphocytes, and as a result, you wind up with swollen lymph nodes and fever and belly pain and chest pain, and eventually non-Hodgkin's lymphoma will kill you. So the EPA says that there's no health problems. IARC says it's a probable human carcinogen. Well, how did two agencies like this wind up with totally different opinions? Let's take a look at the EPA side. The EPA relied on unpublished industrial studies commissioned by pesticide manufacturers. They took the studies that the pesticide manufacturers paid for and reviewed them, unpublished. That means none of us could see those unpublished. It's proprietary information. The general public doesn't get to see this at all. The EPA analyzed a substance that just about no one is exposed to, and that's just pure glyphosate. When you buy a jug of Roundup, there's more in there than just glyphosate. There's other formulants that are in there that help glyphosate be more effective. And then EPA's analysis was limited to just dietary, just what people took in, the small amounts that we take in on a daily basis. Where IARC, this cancer experts from the World Health Organization, they used peer-reviewed studies, studies that we could all find in the literature that are public. We can't find any of them that Monsanto paid for. IARC also looked at formulated glyphosate-based herbicides like Roundup. And this is what people actually use. They don't use pure glyphosate. They use a formulated glyphosate like Roundup and the other formulated glyphosate products that are out there. And also IARC did look at dietary, how much taken in through our food, but they looked at occupational as well. Some occupations, like farmers, like farm workers, not necessarily the managers of the farm, but the workers of the farm. And they looked at elevated exposure, people who really spray for a living, for instance, and spray all the time and maybe have spills associated with it. And this is what they used to come up with the fact that glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen, where the EPA just believes it's safe. So with Trump's EPA, and this is my own statement, with Trump's EPA relative to pesticides is dysfunctional at best and non-functional at worst. That's the way I feel about it right now. We have another federal agency called the U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And they recently came out with a report that said there's a cancer connection between glyphosate and cancer. So there's this connection that goes on. And the EPA, there was an official that tried to kill this report. And all of this information came out when we had the glyphosate cancer trials, and we'll talk a little about those in a minute, those cancer trials out in California. And there's an EPA official on record in one of those emails saying, if I can kill this report, I deserve a medal. All right, but I'm going to try to kill the report. Well, they tried, they almost did, but it has come out. And once again, the EPA is a problem, right along with the USDA and the FDA. They are not interested in the environment. They're interested in corporate interests. Here's another cancer. Besides non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, there's some research that shows that breast cancer cells are stimulated by glyphosate. And this is a research report published in Food and Chemistry Toxicology. That's the name of the professional report. All right. You're going to have access to all of this. You don't need to copy this down. If you email me, I'm going to send you 5 pages of titles of research and the links to that research. So there's a lot of research that I'm able to send you, and you can pick and choose what you want. But glyphosate has been known to induce breast cancer cells in humans. What's so startling about this research, and one of the reasons I put it in here, is we usually talk in concentrations of parts per billion. You see the 1 ppt concentration at the top? The ppt stands for parts per trillion. This is an incredibly small amount of anything, including glyphosate. It's just incredibly tiny amount. But their research finds that that small amount of glyphosate stimulated the growth of breast cancer cells in vitro. In vitro means in glassware, not in living things. So they didn't use mice or humans or anything like that. So this is startling research. There needs to be much more done on this. Breast cancer is epidemic. There's parts of this country where 1 out of every 8 women will wind up getting breast cancer. I've had dear friends and children of dear friends die of breast cancer. It's insidious in America. It's epidemic in America. 1 out of 8 women getting it. Here's another video I'm going to show you. This one's a little longer. I think this will work a little better. This comes from America's Lawyers. It really is going to go into some of the history of glyphosate. It's only about 5 minutes, I think it is, or something like that. But they're going to go into the history and what needs to be done. Of course, these are lawyers, and they're going to want to litigate this, and that's what's happening today in America.
Environmental lawyers have begun filing lawsuits against Monsanto for cancer deaths related to their product Roundup. What these lawsuits are uncovering shows an effort both on the part of Monsanto and the U.S. government to minimize the message about the dangers of Roundup in relation to human cancer. The story begins as early as the 1980s when laboratory tests on glyphosate began to show cellular changes in laboratory animals that should have been considered early signs of cancer. In fact, in 1985, the EPA, during a time when it was actually effective, during a time when it actually worked on behalf of a safe environment, determined that glyphosate, the primary ingredient of Roundup, needed to be classified as a Class C carcinogen, which meant that it clearly was suggestive of a relationship to cancer. But then miraculously, 6 years later, the EPA suddenly changes that classification to something just the opposite, where they claim that, no, we were wrong, and overnight, glyphosate, according to the EPA and Monsanto, the public now has no worries, according to those folks. Nothing to worry about here, move on. All the laboratory testing from the early 80s showed that was used to classify glyphosate as a cancer agent, and that suddenly became unavailable to the public. All that information became unavailable with Monsanto arguing that all that early testing results fall under what they call their protective trade secrets protection, that it can't be shared with the general public. It can't be shared with scientists or the government. The next twist takes place when the World Health Organization issues a statement in 2015 maintaining that Monsanto Roundup herbicide, in their words, is probably a human carcinogen. That's what they said. As you might imagine, Monsanto called in its army of paid scientists, lobbyists, politicians that need contributions that'll sell their soul for anything, and government agencies that were more concerned with mega profits than human health. With government, corporate-controlled media, and even the White House pulling every string to protect Monsanto. And at that point, it appears that the only place this story can fully be told is in courtrooms. That's the only way that this story will ever be told, for a jury to hear the story and a jury to make a decision about how bad the conduct is, both as to Monsanto and the U.S. government in this deadly cover-up that's cost thousands of lives throughout this country and worldwide.
So that gives you a little bit of a history. 1985, the EPA actually took a look at this and determined that there is a connection with cancers, but that all went away. There have been 3 trials. Probably many of you know about these trials out in California. that found out that Roundup actually does cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And really what's so bad about this is Monsanto covered up the risks and failed to tell the consumers. And Bayer, who now owns Monsanto, still continues to deny that glyphosate herbicide causes cancer. Even though they deny that, very recently, within the last couple of weeks, Bayer announced that they're going to pay over $10 billion. A billion is 1,000 million. It's a huge number, all right? 10 billion. The billion's thrown around today in government and in our budgeting for our federal government. It's thrown around like it's nothing today. It's a huge number. So they're going to pay 10 billion to settle claims. About 75% of 125,000 people have alleged that their use of glyphosate caused their cancer. I still see ads on television and on the computer where law firms are saying, if you have cancer, you used Roundup, you think Roundup caused your cancer, call us today. So it's still out there. It hasn't gone away for Monsanto or now Bayer, but $10 billion is a lot, and people think that's a slap in the face. I haven't done the math on any of this, but I don't know what a human life is worth. I know mine is worth a lot more than Bayer's ever willing to pay for it. So that's our talk. Primarily, we have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we have breast cancer research that's quite concerning. But there's other health concerns as well. Glyphosate has been researched and found to be an endocrine disruptor. And the National Institute of Environmental Health actually defines endocrine disruptors as either natural or man-made. They either mimic or interfere with our body's hormones, which the endocrine system actually produces. All right, and these disruptors are chemicals that have impacts on development, reproduction, brain, immunity, and other problems. So I'm going to show you a list of our endocrine glands that we have in our body. So these are all endocrine glands. We used to call these ductless glands years ago because they actually release their hormones directly into the bloodstream. They didn't have a tube or a duct leading it any place. These things were directly released into the bloodstream. So the endocrine system helps control these processes within our body, growth and development. Now, if you're a young child and you're eating glyphosate and you're growing and developing, it can have a severe impact on your growth and development, on all of those things, all of these things that we're looking at here. So reproduction is a big one that's being studied now. So here's a study, and once again, you don't have to write this down because you will have this as one of the studies that I'll be sending you if you so desire. But this was published in Toxicology in 2009. This is like one of the beginning studies of this. You know, this is all kind of relatively new. We knew for many years that glyphosate was an endocrine disruptor in amphibians and reptiles. But now they're taking a look at humans, and this is a study that says that it's an endocrine disruptor in human cells. Here's another study that was published in Reproductive Toxicology in 2018 that really talks about the fact that glyphosate herbicides, when it's fed into female rats, impacts their reproductive abilities, but also what's even more insidious than that is it induces second generation adverse effects on these. So in other words, when these rats are fed glyphosate, usually in drinking water, their reproductive abilities are impaired, but their offspring are also affected as far as their growth, their abnormal growth of appendages and different weights and birth weights and all of these kinds of things in this particular rat variety. This, we use animal studies because we're not going to use humans to do this testing on. So we have to rely on animal studies to try and figure out whether these impacts, these diseases can be attributed to humans, and we compare them with our animal studies. Another disease is something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. All right. I guess there's alcoholic fatty liver disease, but this one is non-alcoholic. It's pretty similar, but this occurs in people that are not alcoholics. So what is it? It's really just what the name says. You wind up with a lot of fat stored in your liver. And not only is it going to impair the functioning of the liver, but it also will have an ability to actually kill some liver cells. So Americans are facing an epidemic in this. It's something that's not a well-known fact by any means, but we have an epidemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease going on. Well, we also have glyphosate and other chemicals now are ubiquitous in our lives. So the research actually comes up with a couple of major points. There's a couple different ways that the liver toxicity can be increased. You can have long-term exposure of very low dosages, or you can have short-term exposure to high dosages of glyphosate and wind up with the same toxicity. Also, research indicates that, that the regulators assume that these low dosages were totally safe. You see, one of the problems with researching this is they will take an animal, let's say mice or rats, and they will feed them a certain dosage of glyphosate. And they continue that dosage higher and higher until it really has an impact on their life. All right. So these very high numbers, they think, oh, well, it takes a lot of glyphosate to impact a mouse's life. They're not looking at what the low dosages every day are doing to those mice. So it's it needs to be looked at much more comprehensively. So here's a report, scientific study that came out in Scientific Reports in 2017. You can see that a lot of this is pretty new reports. This was done on rats, and they found out that low dosages of the Roundup has an impact, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease impact. Once again, you will get a link to this particular report. Also, glyphosate is impacting the human microbiome. And what is the human microbiome? It's all the organisms in our gut. And our guts are really primarily are composed of the small intestine. Humans have between 2 and 6 pounds of bacteria in our digestive systems. All right, I guess it depends on how big a person you are. If you're a big person, you might have 6 pounds. If you're a smaller person, you might have 2 pounds. I didn't find any exact numbers on that when I did my research, but it's significant. We're talking about 2 to 6 pounds of something that's microscopic. So we're talking about trillions of organisms. Glyphosate disrupts the gut microbiome by inhibiting the Shikimate pathway. The Shikimate pathway is a pathway that produces proteins in plants and in some microorganisms. So this is a chemical series that produces proteins from amino acids. And glyphosate kills plants and bacteria by inhibiting an enzyme that's essential for these proteins to be produced. So the glyphosate destroys the enzyme, which stops the proteins, which kills the plant or microorganism. So for years, the EPA, FDA, and Monsanto said that glyphosate is harmless to humans because we don't have the Shikimate pathway. Only plants and microorganisms have it. Well, for some reason, all of those scientists at the EPA and the FDA and all those scientists at Monsanto, they didn't know we have a small intestine that's loaded with bacteria and that glyphosate actually impacts the bacteria in our small intestine. Of course they knew that. It's a well-kept secret. They kept it from Americans because they're more interested in corporate profits than they are our health. So remember that Monsanto patented glyphosate as an antimicrobial and antibiotic agent. Our gut contains trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, thousands of different species. And what happens is the glyphosate kills or alters beneficial bacteria that help keep us healthy, that produce things like vitamins, for instance, and proteins that help digest our food. It kills those beneficial bacteria, and while it kills those, it makes our gut imbalanced and allows the pathogens, the harmful bacteria, to grow. So these imbalances are linked to many diseases. And take a look at the diseases that I've listed here: cancer, diabetes, obesity, and depression. What do those 4 diseases have in common? They're all epidemic in America. All right, all epidemic. Diabetes, when I was a young man, I didn't know one person that had diabetes. I hardly knew a person that was obese. And depression, I didn't know about depression until I was an adult. All right. For some reason in introductory to psych, I didn't catch on to that or something. But depression is ubiquitous in our society. Obesity, diabetes, cancer. It's incredible. So there's a definite correlation here, a factor here. There's going to be a lot more studying going on. This is a hot topic now. The human gut microbiome is being studied now, and we really need to study it in relationship to what's going on in that microbiome. So here's the big question. What are the health risks of ingesting low levels of glyphosate over extended periods of time? 3 times a day, day in, day out. Cheerios for breakfast. Cheerios are loaded with glyphosate. When we test foods, they oftentimes come up with the highest amount of glyphosate. Bread on your sandwiches, a wheat product. Just about all wheat products that are not organic have glyphosate in them. What about the GMO-free verified? Can that have glyphosate? Yes, it can. All right, that little butterfly symbol, all that really says is there's no GMOs in there. But if the ingredients in that particular food item was desiccated with glyphosate, then there can be glyphosate in a non-GMO food item. I hope that's clear to everybody, and if it's not, please ask me a question about it. Okay, well, there's a lot of opinions out there. You're going to get my opinion. Hopefully you're going to form your own opinion about all of this. But there's enough negative scientific research, and I'm going to send you a bunch of it, that I don't want any glyphosate in my life. I don't want any in my food, my water, my air. I'm pretty safe on the air part. I'm pretty safe on the water part because I have my own well that gets tested. But food, you've got to be very careful with food. So if you want to avoid foods that have glyphosate in them, you really need to avoid GMO foods that have GMO ingredients. And here's a list. Be reading this over. Processed foods are loaded. Grow your own. Buy organic. Grow organic. Buy locally grown, but ask questions. You know, is this GMO free? Is this glyphosate free? You know, they have a new a verified food system now, glyphosate free foods that will be coming out. Read the labels. If the food contains corn or soy or derivatives of those products, avoid them, all right? Because most corn or soy, if it's not organic, is going to have glyphosate in it. Now, derivatives, maltodextrin. Take a look at the food that you buy. Maltodextrin is in many, many products, food products. Maltodextrin is a product of GMO corn. It's not it doesn't tell you that on the label. It just says maltodextrin, but it is a GMO product. Don't phase out all your GMO products right away, 1 or 2 a week until you get rid of all of them. And of course, if you're avoiding GMOs, you're avoiding glyphosate and other pesticide residues. Also, the Environmental Working Group has done a nice job in testing foods, but they also have something called the Dirty Dozen and something called the Clean 15. And you can find that on their website, the Environmental Working Group. And they've done some nice testing of glyphosate, and they've really made some waves in the food industry in the last year or so, I guess I'd say. So once again, Regeneration Massachusetts, NOFA Mass, these are the places to go for information on glyphosate. I'm going to tell you about Regeneration Massachusetts. Most of you are connected with NOFA Mass. I'm connected with NOFA Mass. I'm the policy chairperson of the policy committee for NOFA Mass. So I'm very connected with NOFA Mass as well. But Regeneration Massachusetts, we have a Facebook. We talk a lot about this. The social media director that puts this in the Facebook is very knowledgeable about this. And even though he only has his PhD in psychology, he's still very knowledgeable. I think he was a chemistry major as an undergraduate. But at any rate, stay informed, ask questions. You can email me if you have any questions. Spread the word. I skipped a slide here. This glyphosate research that I've been kind of talking about, there's 5 pages of handouts. Please email me and ask for a copy of it, and I will send you a copy of these 5 pages. It's good to do it that way because what is on these 5 pages is the title of the research, and then underneath it is the link. So if you get that via the internet, all you have to do is click on that link and you're going to go right to that research. Don't be intimidated by scientific research. There's something called an abstract in the beginning. It's kind of like a synopsis of all of the research, and it also contains some of the conclusions. So I know people get intimidated by, if you're not a scientist reading this, you don't have to read the whole thing. Just read the abstract that's in the beginning, and you'll learn a lot about this. Now, if that abstract wets your whistle and you want to go into it more deeply, the reports are right there. This is not all abstracts on these 5 pages that I'm going to be handing you. So write down my email address. I've got 2 of them. Ed Stockman, one word, at verizon.net, or ed@regeneration-mass.org as well. But if you're really interested in this topic, please go to our Regeneration Mass and take a look at our Facebook page. And it'll really keep you up to date on a lot of this information. Okay. How are we doing for time here? 6:07. Got 20 minutes or so
Yeah,
for questions.
perfect. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
That was a really interesting overview. I feel like you started at a point where anybody could sort of enter at that level, and then you brought us along to, through a lot of really important information. So I really appreciate that.
The real technical part of it is going to be emailed, though, for people who are really interested in going more deeply into this topic.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I had to switch computers. Are you hearing me okay? I'm
hearing you okay, yes.
Okay, great. We have a number of questions in the chat, but the problem that I'm having right now is that because I had to switch computers, I lost some of the earlier questions. So I'm going to actually start at the end, and then I might see if Susie's still on here, maybe she'd read some of them. Maybe you can also read some of them as well. But I unfortunately lost some of those chat questions when I signed back in.
That's
yeah. The most recent question says, thank you for a deep dive into the health threat of glyphosate. Can you give me your opinion on why the Massachusetts Department of Public Health has not been called out for being complicit with the EPA and the agrochemical glyphosate industry's position on the carcinogenic health threat from the pesticide?
That's a good question. And I've been going to the pesticide board subcommittees meetings. Been doing this for probably about 8 or 9 months now. They have Zoom meetings. They're generally or usually held in Boston in some dark, dreary building. It takes me 3 hours to get to Boston. So these Zoom meetings have been great for me, and I hope they continue it. I've been amazed at these meetings where they approve or allow various chemicals to go into, to be used in Massachusetts, primarily based on information given to them or fed to them by the EPA. And the whole group seems to be very happy with whatever they hear from the EPA. Whatever the EPA says, they go along with. Now, you saw my statement earlier that says Trump's EPA is, when it comes to pesticides, is dysfunctional at best and non-functional at worst. That's what's going on. That information that they're being fed about a certain chemical is really not good information. You can't base decisions on it, but they are very happy to base decisions. So the person who asked that question, or anybody else that would like to join these Zoom meetings, you can do this. All you have to do is email the Mass Department of Ag Resources and tell them that you would like to be placed on the notice, the meeting notice list for the pesticide board subcommittees and the pesticide board as well. All right, I've been going to both of those meetings, but I'm pretty amazed at the whole process. What I'm doing right now is, I've only been to 8 meetings, is I'm really seeing how they operate so I can be more effective in asking questions. And it's not just me. We have other organizations going. Regeneration Mass goes, NOFA Mass goes, just about everyone, and Sierra Club goes. So if you're interested, please email the Mass Department of Ag Resources and get on that, that list. Anybody can go. It's an open meeting. And at that meeting is the Mass Department of Public Health. And you'll watch. It'll be interesting for you. Why they haven't been called out, they're in the plans, and I hope you become part of those plans. Next question.
Thank you. So there was an earlier question from Mabel. Mabel is wondering, can I assume that crops sprayed with Roundup to desiccate them cannot be sold as organic?
Absolutely. Organic farmers cannot use those agrochemicals in any way, shape, or form in any process of the whole agricultural, growing of these crops or processing of these crops. Not only can't farmers use it, but whatever these crops turn into can't be desiccated as well. So yes, if you eat organic, it's the best we have. And in Massachusetts or in the NOFAs in general, the farmers that grow in all of the NOFAs do a good job. And of course, they know they're not allowed to use Roundup in any form or at any time.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's good to know. I'm going to ask, because of my technology issues here, if folks who posted a question earlier could either cut and paste and repost their question, and I'm happy to read it aloud, or if folks could just take themselves off mute for a second and just ask their question aloud. Either way would be fine. But I'm sorry, for some reason they cut you off from the chat if you sign back in. So, so Lynn has a question here. How long does Roundup stay in the soil after application?
Yeah, that's a good question that I'm still trying to answer. I have read, I don't know how many different research articles on that. And I get anywhere from 42 days to 2 years.
Wow.
And I think a lot of that variability has to do with the type of soils that the Roundup is applied to. All right, so I think sandy soils degrade much faster than heavier clay and silt soils. So I wish I could give you an exact answer on that, but I really can't. But don't forget, a lot of people want to know what glyphosate degrades to, but then we have, AMPA, which is very toxic as well. So nobody talks about that and how long that takes to get out of the soil, but that's killing microbes in the soil. And of course, us organic growers, we're very interested in the biological life of our soils. But if you're a chem farmer, you're not really all that interested in it anyway. We talk about healthy soils. Well, to have a healthy soil, you've got to have a healthy microbial and macrobial population in that soil. And in a lot of our chemically treated soils, we don't have that healthy population.
Yeah, great, thanks. Lynn says, thank you very much for all this information, very helpful. So I'm going to pause for a second because it takes people a minute to take themselves off mute, but I'm going to encourage people to, again, either cut and paste their former chat back into the chat so I can see it again, or feel free to take yourself off mute and just jump in and ask your question directly if you'd like to do that, whether you have a new question now or whether you had a previous question earlier. So I'll just pause for a minute. Feel free to take yourself off mute and jump in. So I'm going to jump in with my question while people see if they want to re-ask their questions. What about, I'm not sure if you covered this because like I said, I had some technical glitches in the middle there, but what about eating animals that have been eating, for example, soy or something like that?
There's not a lot of good research done on that. And really today, I'm pretty much telling you what I've been able to find in the research. We need to do more research on that. There are so many issues with the way animals are raised in this country, and there's lots of farmers who feel that when they're feeding corn silage to their animals, that it has glyphosate in them, but they have no alternatives, no choices, no other way. I talk to dairy farmers when I go out and give talks, for instance, and they feel I couldn't even get conventional seeds if I wanted it, and then how would I control the weeds? And my question to them is, how did their fathers control the weeds? And then when they tell me, I said, well, you could do the same thing, but there's not a lot of good research on that. There's research on GMOs and when animals eat them, and I don't know if that's when animals eat GMO crops, I don't know if that's just GMOs or the glyphosate that's the problem. There has been some research done with rats, for instance, that have been fed GMOs and fed just glyphosate, and they find that that there's lots of cancer tumors in those rats if they allow the studies to go long enough. Most animal studies only go for 90 days. If you let them go for 2 years, the normal lifespan of a rat, they wind up with lots of tumors. Now with livestock, for instance, they're not alive long enough to wind up with a lot of tumors. They're really not. Their life is cut short to become food for humans. Same with dairy cows. Dairy cows just don't last that long anymore. And so consequently, there's not a lot of studies been done on it because they are, dairy cows, for instance, turn into a lot of hamburger, and they turn into it pretty early in their lives.
Yeah.
So I don't have a good answer to that.
Yeah. Always more research to be done, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, we have another question. Somebody is asking whether there is any way to remediate glyphosate or AMPA.
Remediate in your body?
Lathrop, could you chime in there and clarify? Do you mean remediate in your body or remediate in, in
In
the
the
soil?
environment?
You never know how long you need to wait for somebody to unmute themselves.
Yeah. You know, we have two environments, the one that's outside us and the one that's inside us. So, you know, I mean, remediation, the way to remediate internally, inside, is to eat organic and let your body cleanse itself. Now, there are products out there. I think Restore is one of them. I'm not much on a lot of products. I'm much on a lot of good food without pesticide residues on it. I mean, I've been an organic farmer for 48 years. So I've watched this progression take place for a long time. And the thing to do is to remediate your internal body by really being very, very pure and eat nothing but organic. And there's some good studies out where they take families, for instance, and you can find this all on the internet, where they take families who are eating conventional diets and they test their urine. The kids, the parents, they test the urine and they find, of course, pesticide residues, glyphosate included, and then they put them on an organic diet for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they test their urine again, and it's almost gone. All those pesticides are gone. So that's the way to remediate the outside of your body. As far as the environment is concerned, we've got to move toward organic regenerative agriculture in this country. And that's the focus of NOFA Mass. It's the focus of Regeneration Massachusetts as well.
Yep, thank you. All right, I'll give another chance for people to chime in if they want to chime in out loud, and then I have a couple more questions as well. So you were talking about how Americans have been exposed to some number of hundreds of % more glyphosate since GMOs were introduced.
Right.
So I'm guessing that's, within the last 20+ years. I'm just wondering is that long enough to see some of the second generation effects that they're seeing in, you mentioned studies with mice or rats where they're seeing second generation effects. Are we at a point where we can see that in humans, and is there research being done?
I don't want to blame everything on glyphosate. First of all, we're living in a toxic soup. I mean, there's just tremendous amount of toxins out there. There's 80,000 chemicals that are in the American environment. Now, we're looking at one. We're looking at one that's pretty ubiquitous, so that's why we've chosen this one. But what about the synergism associated with glyphosate? Glyphosate and other pesticides, when they test conventional strawberries, for instance, they find 7 to 9 different pesticide residues on conventional strawberries. They're the worst thing you can eat in American agriculture, is a strawberry. All right. What about the synergism associated with that? Is it benign? Does it increase the toxicity? Will it impact the body's, response to these pesticides in both a positive and negative way? Who knows? Nobody is studying the synergism. We have so many chemicals we're exposed to that the best we can do is just try and reduce it as much as possible. Now, did I answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's sort of the answer in a lot of cases, is really choose your organic products, grow your organic products, and
That's it.
yeah.
That's it. That's what we need to do.
Pretty basic message.
You know, when I first started farming organically, there wasn't any organic foods in the stores. We are so lucky today. You know, I talk to younger people. I have 2 sons that are farmers. And I talk to them and they say, of course, Dad. Well, they didn't realize it took us 30, 40 years to get there.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. Consumers do have a lot of great choices.
Right.
Okay, I have another question, but I'm going to go to Mabel's question here, which is, will plants take up the AMPA in the soil?
That is, this MPA is not studied nearly enough. And I have not read any research on that, so I don't really know. It's water soluble, and if it's water soluble, some amounts will be taken up. The thing is that breaks down in the soil probably before the next growing season in most cases. So when a farmer sprays a field with Roundup, it's the glyphosate that's taken up, and only small amounts of it will not be taken up by the plant, will remain in the soil, for instance. So I would suspect that not a lot would be taken up because the glyphosate is really in the plant. And glyphosate is very water soluble, so it goes in the root systems pretty nicely into plants and is translocated around the plant. So I have not read good research on that. It's a good question. I've had that question in my mind myself, but I haven't found anything that's really conclusive about it or even concrete about it.
Yeah.
But good question. And if you find something like that, please email me. If you really find something good, really solid about it, please email me because I could use that information.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, we've got another question here. I had this question in the back of my mind too. I was going to hold off on this, but Lynn is asking it, so I'll read it. Why do you think that the U.S. has embraced GMOs, but Europe has at least made mandatory labeling? I remember the BS that it would cause extra costs, but that just doesn't fly. So I've always been curious about this. I was working on an organic farm in Europe in the 90s when there was a lot of this being talked about, and it's interesting to see how things have evolved. I don't know if you want to take a minute to just address that.
I think it has to do a lot with the European culture in general. They call for labeling early. And once these products are labeled, consumers reject them. It's one of the reasons that in the United States, labeling has been a big issue. I was a co-founder of Mass Right to Know GMOs as well. I spent a lot of time at the State House educating legislators about labeling and about GMOs in general. And we do have mandatory labeling now in the United States. It just finished, the USDA just finished their regulations on it. It's going to go into effect in 2022. The only problem with it, one of the problems is not everything that's GMO is going to be labeled. They have their own definitions of things, and those definitions exclude lots of GMO products and processes. So it's really a bogus labeling system we have going on. Instead of labeling it with something like made with genetically engineered ingredients or produced with genetic engineering, which other countries have. There's 50 some odd countries of the world require labeling. There's really only 2 industrialized nations that won't require their citizens, that won't let their citizens know if the products they buy are GMO. One is Canada, and the other is the land of the free. And we all know where the land of the free is. We're not free to know what's in our food, though. And of course, Canada is so economically tied to the United States that whatever we do agriculturally, they'll go along with one way or the other. So labeling is a huge problem. Once labeling happens, then the products are rejected in the marketplace. And I know one thing about farmers. You know, I was raised on a farm. My grandfather was a farmer. My great-grandfather was a farmer. And one thing that I know is farmers grow what they can sell. If you can't sell it, you won't grow it. So in Europe, as soon as that labeling came in, farmers said, well, people are not going to buy this. They're going to reject it. So I'm not going to grow it. And that's why Monsanto and other organizations fought it so much in the United States, because the same things happen here. If it was labeled, consumers would reject it and farmers wouldn't grow it. And if they wouldn't grow it, Monsanto, you know, Monsanto was the largest seed company in the world. People don't realize that. They're a chemical company, but they make seeds and they sell this package deal of GMO seeds that are dependent on glyphosate and other chemicals as well. So I think it has a lot to do with cultural, and Europeans want much cleaner food than Americans. Americans just want satiation. Europeans want more than just getting filled up.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, that's an opinion.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This is all this is great food for thought, and I look forward to, I'm going to sign up to get your handout. Can you just repeat your email address for people?
I'm going to put it on the screen again. Can I do that?
Yep, great.
Are you seeing that now?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So just a reminder, if people want to hear more from Ed, there's his email address. And I'm just going to remind folks to please check out our virtual raffle and our vendor marketplace. I just put those links in the chat. The vendor marketplace offers discounts on a lot of great products with a lot of businesses that we hope you'll support. And the raffle benefits our scholarship program, so please check those out. And also we have our workshop evaluation, so we would love it if you would take a moment and just fill out an evaluation of this workshop. So thank you all so much for coming tonight, and Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.